Memory lane perspective, part 2. We've been looking at making this row of shops appear to go away into the distance using a 500-year-old method that was first used in Florence in Italy in the 15th century. And this fresco by Pietro Perugino, called The Delivery of the Keys, illustrates this single point perspective. You see these lines between the marble slabs going back, all of them going back to a single point, more or less in the centre of the image. It's a fresco, so it's been made on plaster. It's of St. Peter giving the keys to heaven to Christ. It's entirely invented. So the problem that he had with the figures, the problem with the distant figures, the elevation, the single point perspective, all of these ideas existed long before photography. On a more humble and certainly more secular level, this image of the shops shares many of the same properties. And in order to be able to draw these other shops, if I simply draw the first one and then make the others the same, that would probably be the easiest way to do this. Do appreciate that this is not everyone's favourite subject, or even a subject that one might know a lot about. And I've had to learn more about it as this has progressed. So if I continue this line from the ground floor up, I should get an idea of where the upper floor ends, something like that. So I've continued those lines up. I want to make a couple of windows in this upper floor of the first shop. So if I draw diagonals from corner to corner, this one I'll get an idea of where the middle of that shape should be seen from this angle. Then if I draw, I think, the edge of a window using those diagonals as a sort of margin, this is partly guesswork and partly use of the margin, the diagonals rather. Another window, say a window there, and this first window is going to appear larger, the second window is going to appear smaller. The base of the window will be a line that goes back to the vanishing point. So that's given me two windows. They're partly based on guesswork and partly based on some of the theory of going back into the vanishing point over here. So it's been useful to tack on that bit of paper, but I don't really need it. Let's look at the other shops. So all the other windows should line up with the first building going back into space. Excuse me. And that will mean the second shop along come in the same way. I'm looking at this little triangle here, looking at that relationship, the edge, this triangle again, this edge, something like that gives me another set of windows, and so on back into space. The ground floor, there should be a space for a sign below the sort of lintel that between the upper and lower floors. So there's this ledge here between the two floors, and then a sign, space for a sign which can continue all the way down, and then perhaps a door and window below that, somewhere there. If I just draw the first one, the door, I put the door there, make the door about this sort of width, then have the window, shop window just coming in like that. Door is rather wide, perhaps. Then all the other windows, everything else will be the same, just smaller, further away. Let's make this go back a little bit. All these lines that would be in elevation horizontal appear to go back to the vanishing point. So in this old-fashioned building, maybe the door would have a window above it, something like that. So that's going to be the door, and it can be open, and any figure that's relating to the scale of the door, the head height would be about there somewhere, of a tall person. So the average head height across the whole image is going to follow roughly that line back to the vanishing point. Figures in a landscape or a flat setting like this, with a standing viewpoint, all the heads line up. It's the feet that don't line up. So I need to find a figure that's going to fit into this doorway, and rather than draw them anything more onto this piece of paper directly, I would prefer to draw somewhere else. So I've done some research into photographs of street markets. I simply googled images of street markets in the UK in the 1950s, and I came up with this figure here, which I would measure the width and draw a little box around this figure. So I drew a frame around her, and I drew some diagonals. And rather like when we painted drawn a bottle, something taller than it is wide, you would compare the width with the height. It goes a little more than 3 times. So whatever you make the width, and it can be the same or it can be a little bit smaller, doesn't matter. You don't need to use a ruler for this to measure, because the ratio will always be the same, and that can be written down as 1 to 1.3 plus a little bit more. So let's look at the frame to put this figure in, something like this, and then again with a piece of paper, once, twice, 3 times, a little bit more than 3 times. Doesn't have to be very precise. I'm going to draw the diagonals on this, and I'm going to draw a vertical as well. So now if I look at these two side by side, what I would try and do is use the empty spaces, observe the empty spaces as much as the shapes that I'm drawing, which is obviously the woman. I'm going to look at the area around the back of the head here, this empty shape against the frame, the front of the face, this little bit of scarf coming here, the shoulder position coming down somewhere to there, the other arm, sleeve going up, something like that, and the coat. So I'm going for the big shapes first before putting any detail in. So I'm looking at the margins, which is the same thing in principle that we did with the portraits some time ago, and even profiles we looked at in pretty much the same way. And it's a useful way to look at, see all drawing and painting by observing empty shapes. So this empty shape, back to there, that empty shape, this empty shape, get this margin here, not such a big foot, something like that. It's given me the general shape of this woman shopping, hair, scarf. So get the generality first and then draw into it a little bit. And I'd always draw this on another bit of paper. Don't draw it directly onto the watercolour. Collar. Glasses. Mouth. Bag. Large shopping bag. Somewhere. Right there, as far as I can see. So I was trying to draw that only looking at these shapes around the outside of the figure. You don't need to shade these in, but that's just to illustrate where I was looking principally to draw this figure. But because that's drawn on another piece of paper, I could take a softer pencil and scribble on the back of that. Something like a 2B or a 3B. Just draw over the back of that. That effectively makes this into a kind of carbon paper. And then it would be possible to judge where you want to put this figure on here in this row of shops, bearing in mind this line I drew where the average adult head height is. She might be fit in somewhere there, or possibly around here, somewhere in the sort of middle distant area for that scale of drawing. And a way of pushing the drawing through would be to, having scribbled on the back, is to then find the position, maybe draw a few others and see how they relate to each other. Then perhaps with a biro, just draw over this onto the location where you've fitted the figure in. The bag. Trying to follow the drawing as carefully as possible. Feet. So hopefully that should have come through, and it has come through onto the other bit of paper. And that could just as easily come through onto your watercolour paper. So I have looked at other images. I looked at this one, just find this figure in this one. I find that figure in this photograph. I find, by flipping this image, I find this young woman here with the beehive hairdo. And I find these ladies with their prams, and I drew one of them when she'd lost a bit of weight in my drawing. And I find this photograph of Portobello Road, and I flipped it round in the computer, and I like this man here with his bicycle. I can send you all these images, and it is quite a lot of work to draw them, I appreciate that, but it's different from doing perspective. So to save time, I have, if you wish, put these figures together in a single worksheet PDF file, and some of those are for near, for mid-distant, little car also, and distant and far distant. Far distant figures are a little bit, can be just drawn from a simple formula. So if you're looking at figures that are a long way off, they could be drawn with a simple upside down U shape, a compressed letter W, and an oval on top. So that's quite a portly person. Thinner person, one leg carrot person. And I'm hoping to make a little group of figures in this way. Slight variations. There's the upside down U, there's the tall oval. Maybe a little bit different there. So that's how I've made these figures, compressed letter W. They begin to look a bit like a crowd of distant figures. Putting all these elements together, the faraway figures, let's zoom out again. You can choose how many figures to have. You may not want to have very many, or you can make it quite a crowded scene. It's not difficult, I think, to draw once you look at the empty shapes as well as the actual shapes. This little car, I drew from a photograph of this model of car, Ford Popular, and I just took the front of it and drew in the same way, looking at this negative shape. I drew this line, which I thought was quite significant, and then I squashed this bit here. The tracks where the car would fit on the image, I drew to fit with this perspective. So you could just borrow, so the car would sort of fit here somewhere on the image, because that line should chime with this line going back to the vanishing point. It should align with it somewhere there. It doesn't have to be drawn in so heavily. As long as this angle is the same as that angle, the car should appear to be sitting in the distance. This is challenging to do, and we're doing it without the aid of looking at the photograph. So it's going right back to 15th century methods of drawing. I've worked on this a bit more and put in some more figures, put in all those figures that I showed you. And I've drawn in some awnings, and I fitted in some names above the shops, or type of shop, bookshop, bakery, etc. And I thought this would make a good foundation for using colour, particularly the awnings, because then I don't have to draw all the detail in the shops. And the only shop that I've drawn any detail in is the grocer's, and that they're just little rectangles or boxes that I drew along the lines to the vanishing point. If that looks a bit too busy, you could leave out some of these figures. You could suggest some of them. And if it's too complex altogether, I've made a print of this, and I can send you that, and you could use that to choose which to take and which not to have. That, included with this print, should make the kit sufficient to put some information into this drawing. I'm hoping we'll leave it as a pencil drawing, because I think it could be a line drawing as well, but I don't want to push things too far and make you uncomfortable with the amount that's involved. It took me about a day, and a little bit more than a day, to do this drawing, and therefore I'd estimate it as being between the equivalent of 2 to 3 sessions worth, and that's quite a long time to be drawing. And I have made a rod for my own back with this, and I apologise. This was advertised or shown as going to be an investigation of perspective, and it certainly has been that. I'm hoping you can bear with it, and I'll try and show you the colour stage in part 3.